Norwenna and Gundlius were married 2 weeks after the High Council ended. The ceremony was performed at a Christian shrine in Abona, a harbour town on our northern shore that faced across the Severn Sea towards Siluria, and it cannot have been a joyful occasion, for Norwenna returned to Iniswidren that very same evening. None of us from the tour went to the ceremony, though a pack of Iniswidren's monks and their wives accompanied the princess. She returned to us as Queen Norwenna of Siluria, though the honour brought her neither new guards nor added attendants. Gundlius sailed back to his own country, where, we heard, there were skirmishes against the Wee Liatain, the Black-Shield Irish who had colonised the old British kingdom of Diffid, that the Black-Shields called Demetia. Our life hardly changed by having a queen among us. We of the tour might have seemed idle compared to the folk down the hill, but we still had our duties. We cut hay and spread it in rows to dry. We finished shearing the sheep and laid the newly cut flax into stinking retting ponds to make linen. The women in Iniswidren all carried distaffs and spindles, on which they wound the newly sheared wool, and only the queen, Morgan, and Nimue were spared that unending task. Druiden gelded pigs, Pellinor commanded imaginary armies, and Howl, the steward, prepared his tally sticks to count the summer rents. Merlin did not come home to Avalon, nor did we receive any news of him. Uther rested at his palace in Dernovaria, while Mordred, his heir, grew under Morgan and Gwendolen's care. Arthur stayed in Armorica. He would eventually come to Dumnonia, we were told, but only after he had discharged his duty to Ban, whose kingdom of Benwick neighboured Broceliand, the realm of King Budic, who was married to Arthur's sister Anna. Those kingdoms in Brittany were a mystery to us, for no one from Iniswidren had ever crossed the sea to explore the places where so many Britons displaced by the Saxons had taken refuge. We did know that Arthur was Ban's warlord, and that he had ravaged the country west of Benwick to keep the Frankish enemy at bay, for our winter evenings had been enlivened by travellers' tales of Arthur's prowess, just as they were filled with envy by the stories about King Ban. The king of Benwick was married to a queen named Elaine, and the two of them had made a wondrous kingdom, where justice was swift and fair, and where even the poorest serf was fed in winter-time from the royal storehouses. It all sounded too good to be true, though much later I visited Ban's kingdom and found the tales were not exaggerated. Ban had made his capital on an island fortress, Inis Trebes, which was famous for its poets. The king lavished affection and money on the town that was reputed to be more beautiful than Rome itself. There were said to be springs in Inis Trebes that Ban had channeled and dammed, so that every householder could find clean water not far from his door. The merchants' scales were tested for accuracy. The king's palace lay open day and night to petitioners seeking redress of grievance, and the various religions were commanded to live in peace, or else have their temples and churches pulled down and pounded into dust. Inis Trebes was a haven of peace, but only so long as Ban's soldiers kept the enemy far away from its walls, which was why King Ban was so reluctant to let Arthur leave for Britain. Nor perhaps did Arthur want to come to Dumnonia while Uther still lived. In Dumnonia, that summer was blissful. We gathered the dry hay into great stacks that we built on thick foundations of bracken that would keep the damp from rising and the rats at bay. The rye and barley ripened in the strip fields that quilted all the land between Avalon's marshes and Caer Cadern. Apples grew thick in the eastern orchards, while eels and pike grew fat in our meres and creeks. There was no plague, no wolves, and few Saxons. Once in a while we would see a distant pyre of smoke on the southeastern horizon, and we would guess that a shipborne raid of Saxon pirates had burned a settlement. But after the third such fire, Prince Geraint led a war band to take Dumnonia's revenge, and the Saxon raids ceased. The Saxon chief even paid his tribute on time, though that was the last tribute we received from a Saxon for many a year, and doubtless much of the payment had been plundered from our own border villages. Even so, that summer was a good time, and Arthur, men said, would die of boredom if he brought his famed horse soldiers to peaceful Dumnonia. Even Powys was calm. King Gorfythid had lost the alliance of Siluria, but instead of turning on Gunlius, he ignored the Dumnonian marriage and concentrated his spears against the Saxons who threatened his northern territory. Gwynedd, the kingdom to the north of Powys, was embroiled with the fearsome Irish soldiers of Duranach of Clain. But in Dumnonia, the most blessed of all Britain's realms, there was plump peace and warm skies. Yet it was in that summer, that warm idyllic summer, that I killed my first enemy, and so became a man. For peace never lasts, and ours was broken most cruelly. Uther, High King and Pendragon of Britain, died. We had known he was ill. We had known he must die soon. Indeed, we knew he had done all he could to prepare for his own death. Yet somehow we had thought this moment would never come. He had been king for so long, and under his rule Dumnonia had prospered. It had seemed to us that nothing could ever change. But then, just before the harvest, the Pendragon died. Nimue claimed she heard a hare scream in the midday sun at the very moment, while Morgan, bereft of a father, shut herself in her hut and wailed like a child. Uther's body was burned in the ancient manner. Bedwyn would have preferred to give the High King a Christian burial, but the rest of the council refused to sanction such sacrilege, and so his swollen corpse was laid on a pyre on the summit of Caer Mace, and there put to the flames. His sword was melted by the smith Istruth, and the molten steel was poured into a lake so that Gofanon, the blacksmith god of the other world, could forge the sword anew for Uther's reborn soul. The burning metal hissed as it struck the water, and its steam flew like a thick cloud as the seers stooped over the lake to foretell the kingdom's future in the tortured shapes adopted by the cooling metal. They reported good news, despite which Bishop Bedwyn was careful to send his swiftest messengers south to Armorica to summon Arthur, while slower men travelled north into Siluria to tell Gunlius that his stepson's kingdom was now in need of its official protector. Uther's balefire burned for 3 nights. Only then were the flames allowed to die, a process hastened by a mighty storm that swept in from the western sea. Great clouds heaped the sky, lightning harrowed the dead man's land, and heavy rain beat across a broad swathe of growing crops. In Inniswydrin we crouched in the huts and listened to the drumming rain and the bellowing thunder, and watched the water cascade in streams from the thatched roofs. It was during that storm that Bishop Bedwyn's messenger brought the kingdom's great dragon banner to Mordred. The messenger had to shout like a mad thing to attract the attention of anyone inside the stockade. But finally, Howl and I opened the gate, and once the storm had passed and the wind had died, we planted the flag before Merlin's hall as a sign that Mordred was now king over Dumnonia. The baby was not the High King, of course, for that was an honour which was only granted to a king acknowledged by other kings as one above them all. Nor was Mordred the Pendragon, for that title only went to a high king who had won his position in battle. Indeed, Mordred was not even the proper king of Dumnonia yet, nor would he be, until he had been carried to Caer Cadern, and there proclaimed with sword and shout above the kingdom's royal stone. But he was the banner's owner, and so the red dragon flew before Merlin's high hall. The banner was a square of white linen, as broad and high as the shaft of a warrior's spear. It was held spread by willow withies threaded into its hems, and was attached to a long elm staff that was crowned with a golden figure of a dragon. The dragon embroidered on the banner itself was made of red wool that leached its dye in the rain to smear the lower linen pink. The arrival of the banner was followed within days by the king's guard, 100 men led by Owain, the champion, whose task was to protect Mordred, king of Dumnonia. Owain brought a suggestion from Bishop Bedwin that Norwenna and Mordred should move south to Durnovaria, a suggestion Norwenna eagerly adopted, for she wanted to raise her son in a Christian community, rather than in the Tor's blatantly pagan air. But before the arrangements could be made, there came bad news from the North Country. Gorfithid of Powys, hearing of the High King's death, had sent his spearmen to attack Gwent, and the men of Powys were now burning, looting, and taking captives deep inside Tudric's territory. Agricola, Tudric's Roman commander, was fighting back, but the treacherous Saxons, undoubtedly in league with Gorfithid, had brought their own war bands into Gwent, and suddenly our oldest ally was fighting for his kingdom's very existence. Owain, who would have escorted Norwenna and the babes south to Durnovaria, took his warriors north to help King Tudric instead, and Legesac, who was once again the commander of Mordred's guard, insisted that the baby would be safer behind Iniswydrin's easily defended land bridge than in Caer Cadern or Durnovaria, and so Norwenna reluctantly remained at the Tor. We held our breath to see whose side Gundlius of Siluria would choose, and the answer came swiftly. He would fight for Tudric against his old ally Gorfithid. Gundlius sent a message to Norwenna saying that his levies would cross the mountain passes to attack Gorfithid's men from the rear, and that as soon as the war bands of Powys had been defeated, he would come south to protect his bride and her royal son. We waited for news, watching the distant hills day and night for the beacons that would tell us of disaster or the approach of enemies. And yet, despite the war's uncertainties, those were happy days. The sun healed the storm-beaten land and dried the grain, while Norwenna, even though she was mired in the pagan Tor, seemed more confident now that her son was king. Mordred was always a grim child, with red hair and a stubborn heart, but in those gentle days he seemed happy enough as he played with his mother or with Ralla, his wet nurse, and her dark-haired son. Ralla's husband, Gwilithin, the carpenter, carved Mordred a set of animals, ducks, hogs, cows, and deer, and the king loved to play with them, even though he was still too young to know just what they were. Norwenna was happy when her son was happy. I used to watch her tickling Mordred to make him laugh, cradling him when he was hurt, and loving him always. She called him her little king, her ever-loving lover-boy, her miracle. And Mordred chuckled back and warmed her unhappy heart. He crawled naked in the sun, and we could all see how his left foot was clubbed and grown inwards like a clenched fist. But otherwise he grew strong on Ralla's milk and his mother's love. He was baptized in the stone church beside the Holy Thorn. News of the war came, and it was all good. Prince Geraint had broken a Saxon warband on Dumnonia's eastern border, while further north Tudric had destroyed another force of Saxon raiders.